Good evening, everyone. Welcome to International Bridges to Justice, Access to Justice talk series. And just some technical information at this moment. This event will be conducted in English, but there will be interpretation to French. So choose the French flag if you want to listen in French, Spanish flag for Spanish. And for Burmese, please use Japanese flag. For Bahasa Indonesia, Korean flag. And for Arabic, please use German flag. So it's on the screen. So those are some technical details. Please, everyone mute. And if you have questions, please send them to Andrew or Zenian or just IBJ through the chat function. I now invite Karen Shea, our CEO and founder, to open the session. Karen.
Thank you. Well, I just am so excited to see everyone. Actually, I can't see all of you, but seeing some of you on screen. And it's particularly exciting for us to welcome Laura today. And as I think Sanji had said earlier, we've been wanting Laura to speak with us for a while about access to a lawyer in the protection of rights of juveniles. So while we're very excited to welcome Laura, I'm also, Laura and everybody else who's on this call, so excited for you to also meet the International Bridges to Justice country programs and also our justice makers. I think that the commitment that we all have towards protecting juvenile justice is something that is shared globally. And it's always exciting for us, despite the fact that many times it can be very discouraging. We're also, as we just reach out together and share with each other, we're able to both learn together and really build a stronger movement. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody.
Thank you, Karen. It's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Laura Nirider to IBJ's Access Justice talk series joining us today. A 12-year-old boy in Cambodian prison accused of stealing a bicycle inspired Karen Shea to start International Bridges to Justice 20 years ago. Many children, sorry, everyone have to mute. Many children are subject to abuse and torture in police stations around the world. I remember once a 9-year-old child was threatened and abused by interrogating police in my own country, Sri Lanka. And then also in Sri Lanka, a 17-year-old innocent boy was hung from a beam and tortured to obtain confession that resulted in permanent damage to his nerves. And so there are horrible stories like this happening day to day around the world, and children are sometimes subject to these terrible experiences. For example, in Iran, the death penalty can apply to boys as young as 15 and girls as young as 9. According to the UN, 90 child offenders currently on death row in Iran as of October last year. Even in developed legal systems, such as in the US, children are subjected to abuse in the criminal justice system. Today, we will discuss how best to protect rights of juveniles and how to prevent miscarriage of justice, especially for children. We will discuss lawyers' role to most important 4-word sentence. Laura will talk about that later. Children need to know, and even us, we all need to know. Laura Nirider is a passionate advocate for rights of juveniles. She is the clinical associate professor of law and co-director of the Center for Wrongful Convictions at the Northwestern Pritzker School of Law in Chicago. Laura represents individuals who were wrongfully convicted of crimes when they were children, teenagers. Her clients have included Brendan Dassey, whose case was profiled in the Netflix global series Making a Murderer, and Damien Nichols of West Memphis 3, whose case was profiled in the documentary West of Memphis. Laura helped develop juvenile interrogation protocols for police. She's also a frequent presenter on interrogations at defender or defense lawyer and law enforcement trainings conferences around the country. We are privileged to have Laura at IBJ's Access to Justice Talk today. And today, through this event, we are connecting Laura to hundreds of lawyers across the globe fighting to prevent police abuse, torturing detention, protect rights of accused, especially children. So, welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much, Sanjay and Karen and the entire community. It is my honor to be here and my honor to meet and talk to each one of you.
Thank you. I think, Andrew, you can unshare the screen if you want this moment so everyone can see everyone. And so it will be a discussion between Laura and myself. We're going to discuss a number of questions today. So Laura, first, can you tell us about your beginnings with law, why you wanted to study law and wanted to become a lawyer, and what attracted you to criminal law and criminal defense?
Well, let me tell you, I think, my story, what brought me to this space involving criminal law and juvenile justice, because it's a story, as it turns out, that has everything to do with the Netflix series Making a Murderer. Strangely enough. So 13 years ago, I was a law student here at Northwestern University in Chicago. And I thought I had my life figured out. I thought I was going to be a commercial business attorney, the kind of attorney who writes contracts and files lawsuits over monetary disputes. I had a job lined up after graduation. I had my life figured out. I had my plan. It was my last year of law school, and I was looking for a different kind of class to take, something off the beaten path, something new to me. I knew nothing about criminal law, the criminal justice system. I knew nothing about wrongful convictions. I knew nothing about false confessions. So, on a whim, I decided to sign up for a class on wrongful convictions at Northwestern University that just so happened to be taught by a man named Steve Drizzen. I signed up for this class. I'm a complete blank slate. And about 4 weeks into the fall semester, Steve, my professor, calls me into his office. And he says, I've just gotten involved in a case in Wisconsin involving a 16-year-old boy with intellectual limitations who confessed to a crime that I don't think he committed. And he handed me the interrogation video of Brendan Dassey, who had just been convicted at trial about 4 months earlier. Turns out Steve had agreed to handle Brendan's appeal, and I happened to be the nearest student to whom he handed those tapes and decided to work with. So he handed me these interrogation tapes, the same tapes that would go on 10 years later to be included in the Netflix series Making a Murderer. And he told me to go home and watch these tapes. So I went home, I sat down on my couch, I got out my laptop and I put these DVDs in and I watched them from start to finish. And my heart broke. Because I saw on that tape 2 seasoned adult interrogators manipulating a frightened 16-year-old boy into confessing to a murder that he couldn't even describe. And I knew I could not walk away. That, for me, was the life-changing moment when I saw on those tapes what had happened to Brendan. I graduated from law school, and within about 6 months, I returned to Northwestern University to work now as Steve's colleague to build the Center on Wrongful Convictions at Northwestern, where we have represented Brendan and many, many other kids just like him ever since then.
Laura, I think my second question was about what was the turning point in your legal career. I think sort of you answered that question.
Well,
Could yours?
let me, if I can add on that a little bit, Sanjay, that would be great. You know,
Right, sure.
Sure. I mean, the turning point, that was sort of the big revelation for me when I saw
Yeah.
what I didn't know happened to kids. So that is what set me on my current course. But I'd like to talk, if I may, a moment about a second turning point for me and a second thing that's changed very much how I understand the work it is that I do and that we all do as advocates for kids. And that was the release of the Netflix series, Making a Murderer. Now, when Steve and I became involved in representing Brendan Dassey, we had no idea that anyone wanted to make a film or a TV show about this case. We had no idea for years until 3 years into the representation, we show up in court and we're there being lawyers. And we notice that there are these two women off to the side in the courtroom with a handheld camcorder, a video camera, recording everything we're doing. And after a few days, we walked over to them and said, "What are you doing?" And they told us that they wanted to make a movie about this case. And we said, "All right, well, best of luck to you." They were both still students themselves, right? They were still in graduate school. They had never made a film before. They didn't look particularly,
Yeah.
serious. So we said, "Best of luck to you." And we never thought about it again until the show did come out. And it grabbed the world in the same way that Brendan's story had grabbed me when I was a law student. And it was incredible for me to watch millions of people around the world have that same moment of realization, that same moment of education, and that same moment where they couldn't walk away, just like I couldn't. 20 million people watched that show in the first 2 weeks alone, just in the United States. And to this day, when I travel around the globe, I was in New Zealand a few months ago, and someone came up to me in the airport and said, "How's Brendan?" And the power of simply telling the story of what happened to him is very real. And that has taught me so much over the last few years.
Laura, how did this particular case affect your attitude, values, and commitment to criminal justice?
Oh, this case, well, I mean, it's a very good question, because as I think we all know, there are so many Brendan Dasseys in the world. So many children and teenagers and adults, frankly, who have a similar story. So I think about that a lot. Sometimes I think of Brendan as the luckiest, unlucky person I know. That his case, out of all these hundreds of thousands around the globe, quite likely, was happened to be turned into this film. So in a way, I think about how he's become this representative of this much, much larger problem. And that's, I think, the power of his story it's not simply a story about this bad prosecutor or these bad cops in this place. It is a universal story. Children are children, no matter where you live, no matter who you are, no matter if you're educated or not, if you're limited or not, if you're wealthy or not. A child is a child. And it's the universality of that story, I think, that's grabbed people's imaginations and hearts.
Laura, what were the kind of challenges you faced defending children, Brendan's case and others? And How did you overcome them? Because that's quite important for us, because we are
Yes.
joined today by many lawyers who are working in the area of defending children and accused, and they face challenges too. It's good to hear from you what kind of challenges you faced at work, at home, and in general.
And I wish I could hear from everybody on this call, because I think we all have contributions to make there. I can tell you one of the challenges that I face, that I'm sure we all face, is building relationships, trusting relationships with the children that we represent. You know, when I first met Brendan, again, to use him as an example, he had already been convicted. He had already gone to trial. He had already had 4 lawyers by that point, 4 different lawyers at different stages in his proceedings. And one of his lawyers, in particular, the lawyer who represented him before his trial, was terrible, was somebody who did not believe in Brendan's innocence, somebody who in fact worked to develop evidence of Brendan's guilt, who did not advocate for him, who was not on his side, and who shattered any remaining trust that Brendan had in the legal system. And, you know, this is somebody who had been through a coercive interrogation, so there really was not very much trust there to begin with. You know, Brendan had been manipulated by police officers who we all think, many people think, are to be trusted. He had had that trust broken. When he received legal counsel, his attorneys did not fight for him. That trust was broken. And on and on and on. So by the time I met him, and I'm sure we've all had this experience, to get him to trust me took a long time. It took many meetings. It took me realizing that the questions I wanted to ask about what happened, what's true and what's not true, I had to wait to ask those questions. And I realized that what I needed to do was simply show him that I was on his side. So for example, one of the things that I learned, and that I think is true, is very simply always keep your promises to the child. If you say, I will visit you next week, visit him next week. If you say, I will tell your mom this, tell his mom that. These small gestures of trust build and build and build over time. And, you know, in a case where what you ultimately need to talk about is very sensitive and very difficult and perhaps very painful and traumatic to talk about, if you can take that time to build those relationships, I think that's absolutely crucial when you're dealing with kids.
So you touched upon my next question about why children are vulnerable within the criminal justice system. We know children are generally vulnerable, but why are they vulnerable within the criminal justice system? What special safeguards need to protect them? We can talk about your own experience and citing some of the examples of how children were abused in a way. I think that, could you describe a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. You know, the United States, we and our laws around juveniles have been very focused in the past 10 or 15 years on adolescent brain development, on the science of how teenage minds work, right? We know, of course, that adolescents, as they develop, their brains are developing as well. And we know from brain science that certain parts of kids' brains develop at different rates, at different speeds. And we know that the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain right here, which is the part that acts as a brake on judgment, that regulates decision-making, the part that says, maybe I shouldn't do that. That is one of the later parts of the brain to develop, which is why across the globe, we see adolescents, teenagers engaging in risky behaviors, right? Whether it's driving the car too fast or drinking, taking drugs, staying out too late, partying, all of these activities that we associate with adolescence, right? We know it's because that judgment, you know, focal point of the brain is not yet fully developed. And when you understand that impulsivity that is built into kids' brains, then you begin to understand better the way in which they interact with the legal system. So for example, in the interrogation room, when kids are being questioned, certainly when physical torture is involved, but even in cases where it's not, where the interrogation is psychological, you see that adolescent brain developments can greatly affect the way kids respond to questioning by very intimidating authority figures, right? We know that because of brain development, teenagers are more impulsive, are more vulnerable to peer pressure. We know that teenagers are more focused on short-term benefits and less focused on long-term consequences. So if a teenager is in the interrogation room alone, being coerced, threatened, God forbid, abused by police, a teenager is even more likely than an adult in those circumstances to focus on the short-term need to say or do whatever is required to bring that situation to an end. That is why we see false confessions at a rate 2 to 3 times higher from adolescents as compared to adults. And that's just one tiny corner of the functioning of the criminal justice system, but it's a passion of mine, the way kids are treated by police in the interrogation room. We know they're particularly vulnerable, and it's up to us as lawyers to think about ways to counteract that, to protect kids in the room before it's too late.
So we just started connecting to my next question about, IBJ, International Bureau of Justice, focus a lot on early access to a lawyer. Earlier you accused access lawyers, particularly in criminal justice systems, where there are a lot of not so developed justice systems, including police, particularly in the police. And when the only method police know in many countries is torturing your suspect to obtain a confession or admit to something they may or they may not have done, and most of the time they may not have done. So could you tell us a bit about how you talked about child's mind and child's brain, the way you think? Are lawyers trained on these things? Did you learn that, for example, when you were studying? How can a lawyer help protect rights of children at an early stage, particularly at the time of investigation and interrogation, and how important that particular stage in a lawyer's role?
Well, let me return to, I think, what a theme of my talk will be, which is that as lawyers, we are advocates. Yes, that is true. But in many countries, including the United States, lawyers are very rarely present during interrogations, right? We're simply not allowed to be there. Certainly without the child invoking rights here in the United States, which is very unlikely to happen. So what can a lawyer do when you're not in the room? And one of the themes I would like to leave folks with today is a larger theme, which is we are not just legal advocates. We are not simply guides through this court process. We are not simply experts in legal procedure. We are witnesses. We are witnesses to these things that happen, even if we're not in the room, when we meet our clients afterwards and we hear from them their stories, which may take time for them to tell. But when we hear from them what they have lived through, it is up to us to tell those stories to the public, in my opinion, and to policymakers who can help change the laws so that it doesn't happen again, right? I think for me, that's been one of the great lessons of my career, is the power in telling these stories. Now, an interesting thing, again, to use Brendan as an example, and I do only because I think perhaps some people on this call know his case. What's interesting about Brendan's case is a few years before he was arrested and interrogated, there was another case in Wisconsin involving a 14-year-old boy who was believed to have confessed to a crime he didn't commit. And that case, lawyers from around the country, including Steve, my then professor, used that case as an opportunity to advocate in Wisconsin for a new law requiring cameras in the interrogation room, right? At least let us get transparency. At least let us record what happened so that when the lawyer is allowed finally to enter the case, we have some record, some objective record of what happened. And Wisconsin actually was one of the first states in the United States to require cameras in the interrogation room. And it enacted this law specifically for kids only. When kids are being interrogated, those interrogations must be recorded. And as it turns out, Brendan's interrogation was the first homicide interrogation in the state of Wisconsin to be recorded under this new law, which, unbeknownst to us, allowed the world to see what happened to Brendan years and years later. And after the world saw what happened to Brendan, laws began to be changed in the United States. You know, in most states in the United States, there is no requirement for an adult to be present, an appropriate adult to be present in the interrogation room with somebody under 18. In most states, a child can be taken out of school or out of the home and questioned without the parent even knowing or being told, let alone giving permission. And after Brendan's case became known, we were able to work with policymakers in 2 states to create the first laws in the United States requiring lawyers for kids in the interrogation room, which 5 years ago would have been politically unimaginable in the United States. So, you know, it's a long process that played out perhaps over the course of 20 years, and there is still so much work to be done. But when I say we as lawyers have a privilege because we see information, we hear stories that almost no one else hears. The question is then, what do we do with what we see? Do we go home and wring our hands and try to forget because it's hard to hear? Or do we tell those stories? Do we continue to advocate? Do we not forget? Do we insist that others listen? And I would urge the second.
You talked about wrongful convictions and particularly linked to false confessions. And you talked about it a little bit. And can you talk a little bit about how that happens and how to prevent false confessions by the accused, and what could a lawyer do at an early stage to prevent confession? I'm particularly asking this because, you know, even in some countries like my own country, Sri Lanka, confessions are normally not admissible in a court of law. Still, police torture people to get confessions because once people confess, and even though that confession is not admissible in the court of law, often police use that to get a guilty plea in the court. Right. So I think, and there are horrible methods used to obtain confessions. Yeah. And so could you talk a little bit about that, and particularly, you know, what kind of methods they use and why we need to counter those methods?
Yeah, I would be happy to. And this is my own particular area of interest, you know, this overlay between false confessions and children and coerced confessions. You know, interrogations happen different ways around the country and around the world, of course. In many places, including some places here in the United States, physical torture is still used. And I believe it is easy relatively easy to understand why one might falsely confess when being physically tortured. I think that is easy for most people to understand. But what is harder for people to understand is why one might falsely confess when you're not being physically tortured, rather when you're being subjected to psychological interrogation, which is predominantly what's used here in the United States. There's really only a few isolated instances of systematic torture, including here in my home city of Chicago. But psychological interrogation is fascinating, the way that it works. There's an organization here in Chicago, again, that trains police all across the United States and in many other countries how to interrogate psychologically. And it's a deeply coercive process, right? This technique essentially unfolds in two halves. The idea is that you isolate the suspect, you bring them into the station, you put them in an interrogation room that's specially designed to make them feel isolated, off from the world, cut off from outside help. Then the officer comes into the room, accuses the suspect of the crime, refuses to listen to denials, shut down the denials, interrupt the denials, don't let the person deny, because then the idea is if they deny it, they'll get psychologically attached to the idea of their own innocence. Instead, tell them that the case against them is solid, is powerful, that there is overwhelming evidence against them. And here in the United States, police are allowed to lie about the evidence to a suspect. So a police officer may say, no one's going to believe you're innocent because I have your DNA at the scene, because we have a witness who saw you doing this, because we found your fingerprints on the knife, and so on. And the suspect eventually is reduced to hopelessness. This officer says he has my fingerprints. I don't know how that's possible, but no one is going to believe that I'm innocent. What do I do? And then the officer offers confession as the out, right? If you keep denying this in the face of this overwhelming evidence, you will get the death penalty or you will get life in prison. But if you admit to it, people will understand that you cooperated, they'll want to help you, the system will look at you differently, you'll be treated differently, I'll be able to advocate for you with the judge will see that you're a good person, and on and on and on. And this is how we get confessions in the United States, for the most part. They're incredibly powerful techniques. You're trapped, but confession is your life raft. But it's not, of course, because after you confess, that's the most powerful.
Is that
possible.
what you?
Sorry?
I'm sorry. We have a little disturbance. So,
Fine.
Andrew, can you check it out? Right. Can you? Is that what you were describing related to the read technique? Because I just got a comment from an audience saying, "Could you describe read technique?" And ironically, where it began.
It began right here in Chicago, and in fact, yes, what I'm describing is a rough description of the read technique. It is also it's a rough description of most commonly used interrogation tactics in the United States and overseas as well. It is a rough approximation of the read technique. This is the read technique is the technique sold by the firm here in Chicago that I mentioned. And what's ironic to me is that this psychological set of tools that are used to induce confessions, they were first developed at Northwestern University, where I teach, by a law professor back in the 1940s. This is when these techniques were beginning to be developed. And what's interesting is that they are still used to this day, even though DNA technology was invented in the 1980s, started to be used in the 1990s, and began proving confessions false at a rate much higher than we ever believed, and under different circumstances than we believed. Again, it's easy to understand why someone might confess falsely if they're being tortured, but we started learning that these psychological techniques were just as coercive. We had this revelation in the 1990s and 2000s with DNA, but practice hasn't changed. in the United States yet. These old, outdated techniques are still being used. So that's one of the things our center does, is work with progressive police organizations who want to get it right. They are out there, who want to market themselves as, we will teach you, police, how to get true confessions while minimizing the risk of false confessions. And that's been one of the wonderful pieces of work that we've enjoyed doing, is working with police officers who want to get it right. But I think the larger point I want to make about false confessions, we talk a lot about the rights of the accused, the rights of the juvenile, and I think around the world, it is easy for people to say, this kid is guilty, so I don't care about his rights. This kid is a murderer, or this kid is a rapist, or whatever the case may be. That is why we focus on false confessions. Because when you show people that ignoring a child's rights increases the risk of a wrongful conviction, that is how you can drive legal change that benefits everyone, whether guilty or innocent, right? Again, we use Brendan's case to change the law so that now lawyers will be in the interrogation room for both guilty and innocent. So that's an argument that I make very often. You should care about these rights, because if they're ignored, we'll end up convicting innocent people. And that could be you, and it could be your child, it could be your neighbor, it could be your student, and that can't happen.
Are lawyers present now, this more present of lawyers during interrogation after these changes happening? And is it making a difference?
Lawyers are not more present because in the United States, at least under our legal scheme, except in those 2 states I mentioned, under our legal scheme in the United States, when a lawyer does come into the interrogation room, any lawyer who knows what they're doing will shut down the interrogation, will stop it, will exercise their client's rights. So when we talk about a lawyer in the United States being in the interrogation room, in many instances, we're talking about stopping the interrogation, which is the difficulty for us. But what we can do, again, and I hope that we are able to enact more laws requiring lawyers in the interrogation room, because I think, especially with kids, the cases against kids need to be based on evidence other than the words that the child can be made to say. So I'm okay with additional levels of protection in the interrogation room for kids that may reduce the frequency of interrogations. But again, when the lawyer cannot be in the interrogation room with the child, which is most cases, even here, the most important thing, again, is to have a record of what happened in the interrogation room, at least so you can know and prove what was said and what was done, right? Here in the United States, 15 years ago, there were only 3 states that required interrogations to be recorded. But over the past 15 years, momentum has built as more and more wrongful convictions have been discovered and discussed in the press. More and more momentum has built. Today, we have 27 states that require electronic recording in the interrogation room. And I suspect in another 10 years, we'll be close to all 50 states. It is not a solution, it is not a prevention, but it is transparency, and it is a crucial first step to remedying the situation.
Particularly when it can also work as a deterrent when the police is aware it's been recorded, right? And
Yes.
There's more awareness in that.
Yes, absolutely.
So my next question is in relation to public awareness. In IBJ's work, one of the things that we do is also we inform the public about their rights. Many people, even some educated communities in a number of countries where we work, don't know the right to have a lawyer present, or right to ask for a lawyer. So what is there a lack of awareness on rights of the accused among the public? particularly also we talk about juveniles, so young people. If so, what need to be done to create awareness? And that context side, you can touch upon the most important forward sentence, that I heard in your podcast. Anyone should know, particularly children.
Yes. Well, that most important forward sentence is, I want a lawyer, right? At least here in the States, if someone being interrogated says those 4 words, I want a lawyer, police must stop the interrogation. Do they always stop the interrogation? No. But again, when we have a recording of the child or the suspect invoking those rights, I want a lawyer, then we can at least bring it to the judge afterwards and say, you see, the rights were not observed, the confession should be inadmissible and shouldn't be used to further any case against this person. Is there a lack of awareness among the public? Yes, I think that's true across the globe. All of us, I think so many people believe this won't happen to them, that this is only for people who are different than us, people who are not worth as much as I am, as we are, right? People who are different. And of course, what we know is that injustice, coercion, torture, wrongful convictions happen to everyone. They happen to wonderful people, worthy people, humans worth fighting for, humans who could be your family members, your neighbors, your friends. And so I think that lifting up the stories, again, of the people with whom we work, of our clients, of these children and their families and what they've been through, to show that these people of value and worth had these horrific injustices perpetrated on them. I think that is so key, so crucial. And it doesn't require a Netflix series, right, to do this. You can write, as I have done for many, many years, you can write letters to your newspaper in your town. You can try to publish articles. You can go on social media and start talking about it. That is an incredibly powerful tool. Create a video and post it on Instagram or tweet about it on Twitter. Engage with organizations, have networks that can amplify your message and your client's message. Take photographs, if you can, of your clients. Show people what injustice looks like. Show them what it looks like when a child comes to you and tells you a story of being tortured or abused. And then tell them what to do about it. You all know things that can be done in your countries, just as I see the things around me that I think we can do here. Be the witness, be the voice. Teach kids how to protect themselves as best they can, right? I think many people on this call do what we do as well, which is go into high schools. We go into schools here in the United States and we talk to teenagers and we say to them, if the police ever come to speak to you, be polite, be respectful, but I want a lawyer, and don't say anything more, right? Even if you're innocent, even if you're mad, even if you got a whole lot of things to say to those police officers, keep it quiet. I want a lawyer. But it can't all be put on kids too, right? We go to judges, to judicial conferences, organizations, and I play them the videotape of Brendan or any of my clients. And I say, I know you perhaps have seen many cases like this. I know you may be prepared to say, well, this person confessed, so they're guilty, they're a throwaway person. But let me peel back and tell you what I saw here. Let me tell you about what my client experienced that wasn't on this video. Let me tell you what psychological experts say about these techniques and what they will do to a person's ability to resist and what they will do to our system's ability to find the truth. We speak to judges, we speak to prosecutors, we speak to defense attorneys. I mentioned working with police organizations, if they will listen to us. Anyone who will listen, I tell our clients stories too. And I tell people what we can do about it. Get involved, get on social media, don't forget their names, and don't rest until we've changed.
And what was the general response when you do that?
It's good, actually. It's good. I love speaking to police. Actually, this past fall, there was some huge police conference just outside of Chicago. There's like 11,000 police officers from all across the United States, and I was invited to speak about false confessions for a day, like 8 hours. And I walked into this hotel, and there are 11,000 police officers. I'm the shortest one by 2 feet in the entire place. And I thought, well, how is this going to go? And they started coming up to me just at during lunchtime and saying, I saw what they did to Brendan on TV. I would never do it that way. Please give him my best. Those officers did it wrong, and I'm more aware of it. I'm more aware of myself now because I saw that. They were receptive, and not just receptive, but they have kids. And if they see the commonality between their kids and Brendan or any of our clients, that's when hearts and minds begin to open, I think. That's certainly not always been the case. I've spoken before the Chicago Police Department, too, which had a torture scandal. And that was not quite as friendly of a space, but keep trying, keep trying.
I think that's it's very, very important because sometimes you can be just a lone person trying to do this, and even among the lawyers, not everyone may be sharing, same passion and same attitudes and values, but I think the belief that people can be changed, there are good people, and I think there are more good people than bad people. It's just reaching out to them, touching not their heads, but also touching their hearts,
Yes.
and tell the story, and telling stories in a powerful way and compelling way. Laura, yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, and to be willing to use yourself as the advocate. People may be more likely to believe a lawyer or somebody educated, somebody from a different class structure, whatever it may be. And we have to be willing to use the privilege, whatever kind of privilege we have, even if it's simply having a voice, an educated voice, to elevate our clients,
That's quite important because in some of countries where we work, we also see police, defense lawyers conniving together to the detriment of the rights of the accused. And often lawyers are instrumental in asking their clients to plead guilty, because once they do that, they get a bribe from the police, because the police often refer that case to them. These kind of things happen. So it's a struggle also within the legal community to develop ethics, values, commitment, with IBJs trying very hard to work with communities around the world. So Laura, we're coming to the end of this question and answer discussion. Just want to ask you, what is your message and appeal to lawyers, particularly young lawyers around the world, in relation to protecting rights of the accused, and particularly juveniles?
Yes, I think when you enter the criminal justice system as a young lawyer, it can be easy to become part of the system, perhaps in the way that you just mentioned. You can see lawyers older than you who are perhaps doing things that are wrong, whether it's accepting bribes or failing to prepare or not ever talking to the client, whatever it may be. You are entering into a system that is not perfect, that is far from perfect. You must operate within that system because that's the legal system that governs what's going to happen to your clients. But remember who you are. Remember why you chose this work. When you meet your clients, think of yourself when you were their age. Think of your kids, think of your neighbors, your friends, and know that this is a child who needs your voice, who needs you to be brave, even when the system wants you to be quiet. You know, it can be very, very hard to stand up in court and do what's right. I remember the first time, again, I went to court for Brendan Dassey. I remember this in 2010 for his hearing in Wisconsin. And, you know, his case was high profile in the state at the time. This was way, way, way before Netflix got involved. But there were TV cameras there and a huge audience. We went into the courthouse and I sat at the table in the front next to Brendan. And at the time, I was about the same age as the victim. And I think I looked a little bit like the victim as well. And the courtroom was packed. Hundreds of people, reporters, the victim's family, police officers, dozens and dozens and dozens of police officers, people from the town. And they looked at Brendan and they looked at me like we were the devil. And I remember sitting there with all those eyes on my back and on Brendan's back. And I remember thinking, this is where I need to be. He needs me. How could he possibly fight this power? I don't know how I'm going to do it, but how could he possibly do this alone? He needs someone to be there, to at least stand in the way of what's going to happen to him. I have never felt more at home than in that moment. And it's a moment that I will never forget and that I haven't forgotten my entire career because it was hard, but it was right. And that's what lawyers can do. They can be the voice, the advocate, the rock for their clients in the courtroom and outside the courtroom. If you can tell these stories, if you can elevate what happened to them, if you can catch people's hearts, that is how we will make change, not just one client at a time, but across a legal system. And that's how we can do it, and we can do it together. That's why organizations like IBJ are so crucial, because it can feel very lonely. But we can build these communities, we can build them across borders, we can share ideas and inspiration and successes and failures and work together to change the world, because that's what this is all about.
That's possible, right? Yes, okay, thank you. And we're going to moving to the next session of questions and answers. And before that, I would like to invite my colleague Andrew Ozanian from IBJ Geneva office to talk a little bit about, just introduce IBJ Youth. We have a youth group, a passionate group of young people working to advocate rights of child, rights of, and also to get young people involved in the area of justice. Andrew, would you please unmute and speak?
Hi, hi everyone. My name is Andrew Ozanian, and I'm with the IBJ team. I just wanted to say a few words on a new initiative IBJ launched this week. Karen's already mentioned it at the beginning of the call, and Sanji touched on it too. Very much related to the subject we're discussing today. IBJ's Youth for Youth Justice Competition. The idea is that the best ideas on how to improve justice in a community come from members of that community. And also we want to give youth the opportunity to do something for other young people around them. So we're opening up to receive innovative or interesting ideas from youth all over the world. And we're going to pick a few and give financial awards and funding to implement those ideas. So anyone from high school to young lawyers, or just young people who have graduated in other fields as well, anywhere in the world. And we want to hear from you. We want to hear your ideas. We want to hear their ideas. So anyone who wants to apply or who wants more information can email us at youth@ibj.org. And I'll write that email address in the chat for everyone as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. So with relation to the questions that we have today, I would like to first invite one of IBJ, actually lawyers, very active in the area of criminal defense, but also particularly have been working for decades defending young people in Burundi, Aline Jembere. Aline, if you are there, you can unmute and ask your question, and then I do have your questions or your comment. You can share your comment, actually rather a comment, and then I'm happy to read it in English as well. Aline will be speaking in French. Aline? Can we see you, Aline, or not?
Hello everyone, I'm Aline Jembere, BBJ. I have one question and one comment. Let me talk in French, even if the translation is not good. Maybe some will hear me. Ma question est celle-ci. C'est vraiment une très bonne chose que les avocats et même les autres organisations s'apprêtent à être disponibles pendant les premières heures au moment de l'arrestation des détenus, essentiellement pour les mineurs. Mais je m'interroge, est-ce que la célérité en soi est-elle toujours une bonne garantie de justice pour mineurs? Je prends par exemple une situation, par exemple au Burundi, comme dans la plupart des pays en voie de développement. Nous avons des cas d'arrestation des mineurs qui se commettent pendant, par exemple, les week-ends, et l'arrestation se fait ou pendant la nuit ou pendant les heures où vraiment aucun avocat pro bono n'est disponible pour assister l'enfant. Alors, sur base de ceci, je m'interroge, est-ce que l'interrogatoire immédiat de l'enfant serait une bonne chose? Je me dis que non. On sait bien que l'article 3 de la Convention relative aux droits de l'enfant précise très bien que toute décision qui se prend doit tenir compte de l'intérêt supérieur de l'enfant. Alors, face à cette situation, la police et même les autres intervenants en la matière doivent être formés et bien informés sur les droits des enfants. C'est pour cela que nous, BBGA, Burundi Bureau Justice, et moi aussi, avons beaucoup sacrifié nos efforts pour former les OPJ, les officiers de police judiciaire, sur les droits de l'enfant. Notamment, il se peut arriver que l'enfant ait fait des aveux suite à la peur, suite même aux actes dégradants. Ce n'est pas toujours exclu dans les coins reculés. Donc, c'est...
I think we lost him momentarily. I know that some of you were listening to translation, but I'd like to read a kind of a question she framed, as well as she basically made a comment. The question is: a problem in Burundi and other developing countries, a minor can be arrested very far from urban centers, put temporarily in remote areas over a weekend, and really no pro bono lawyers or even lawyers in some of those places, and confess out of fear. So we need to find different ways to protect those minors, especially the lawyer sees them sooner. So for example, educating the police on the rights of the child is important. If child asks for a lawyer, the police should learn to respect that request. In fact, Burundi Bridges to Justice, Aline and the team have been training police on the rights of the accused, have seen also been educating public that they can ask for a lawyer if a child is arrested, and hope these efforts will reduce abuse of the accused, especially children. So it's basically a question, and also she actually provided the answer with what they're already doing. I want to request Aganze Felix from Congo. Would you like to share your comment? Felix.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour la parole nous accorder. Dans les systèmes juridiques l'assistance judiciaire en faveur des mineurs est gratuite. Et cela est prévu par l'article 12 de la loi portant protection de l'enfant. Néanmoins, ce système pénal ne prévoit pas la disponibilité, la permanence ou le rattachement des avocats au poste de police. Dans la plupart des cas, d'après mon expérience, les instructeurs des dossiers des mineurs n'informent pas les parents dès l'arrestation ou la détention des mineurs. Les avocats ne peuvent intervenir que s'ils sont consultés et payés les honoraires, sauf s'ils sont désignés soit par le juge ou soit par le président du barreau.
We have a problem with the connection. Okay, continue.
DR Congo Bridges to Justice. Au sein de DR Congo Bridges to Justice, en tant qu'avocat, nous essayons de changer ces habitudes. Nous espérons ainsi donc que nos efforts inspireront nombre d'autres avocats congolais pour améliorer l'aide légale aux mineurs. C'est cela notre commentaire. Merci.
Thank you. Merci. Merci beaucoup, Felix. I just want to read that in English for the translators, also for other languages. In Congolese legal system, legal defense assistance is free according to the law. However, the criminal justice system does not make lawyers available or permanent or attached to police stations, so they can't make early representation. Lawyers support themselves by charging fees and can only intervene in the context they are consulted or if appointed by a judge or the president of the bar association. And in most cases, in Felix's experience, those managing juvenile files do not inform the parents of an arrest or charge against a juvenile. These are talking about the lawyers. So, however, at the Democratic Republic of Congo Bridges to Justice, or DRC Bridges to Justice, we as lawyers are trying to change these habits and and we're trying to do differently than other lawyers, and we hope our efforts will be taken up by many other Congolese lawyers and also lawyers around the world. Merci beaucoup, and thank you, Felix. And I would like to now invite Yasmin Sharif, IBJ Justice Makers Fellow from Malaysia. Just to let you know about Yasmin. Yasmin has been working for decades like juvenile rights in Malaysia and around the world. And Yasmin was also a member of the UN, former member of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, which actually enforce and monitor the implementation on Convention on the Rights of the Child. And Yasmin, it's our privilege to have you. If you are there, please share your experience.
Hello. Greetings from
Hello.
Malaysia. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can't see you though. Can we see you too or not?
Let's see. Yes, here we go.
Okay. Yes,
That's
hi,
right.
Yasmin. Go ahead.
Hi. Right. I'd just like to share that I've been an advocate for policy and system change to advance juvenile rights in Malaysia and throughout the world for more than 20 years. And according to the Malaysian law, lawyers are allowed to be present during recording of the first statement by the police. However, they're not allowed to be present during the interrogation at the police station. The National Legal Aid Foundation is a state-funded legal aid scheme active since 2012, and I am a accredited and trained volunteer of the National Legal Aid Foundation. The objective of the National Legal Aid Foundation is to provide legal representation and consultation for all Malaysians at every stage of a criminal case, i.e. during arrest, remand, bail application, trial, and appeal as well. The foundation guidelines stipulate that as soon as an arrest has been made by the enforcement agency and before the suspect is questioned, the police officer must inform the suspect's family or friend of the arrest and must also provide details of the suspect and the arrest to the National Legal Aid Foundation, who will then dispatch a duty lawyer to the relevant police station or detention center to provide legal representation. And during the detention, the National Legal Aid Foundation will send lawyers to respective remand courts to provide legal representation. It is the duty of the lawyer to make sure that the magistrate has the full facts of the case. Legal procedures are to be strictly complied with. While there are other legal aid bodies in Malaysia, the National Legal Aid Foundation provides legal aid in only criminal cases to citizens, but when it comes to children, all of them, regardless of citizenship, are entitled to assistance. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Lovely to have you with us. Yasmin, I know you are such a committed person to juveniles, and I believe some of these entitlements you shared were also as a result of your hard work, and you and many others worked very hard to get these procedures in place, and now they are available as rights. Thank you, Yasmin, for joining us late in the evening.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Right. I just have one more question from the audience. There are many questions from the audience, but we try to accommodate some. And this is from Shannon Rollins, JD, a lawyer, a high school teacher who serves on several committees pushing for change. She said, how can schools be reformed through restorative justice programs to disrupt school to prison pipeline? So I think you have that question, and you have other comments and concerns shared during this session, Laura, and it's an opportunity to sort of give your own comments on these things, and also any final words that you want to leave us with.
Wonderful. Well, for the first three remarks from Aline and Felix and Yasmin, it is my honor to hear from you about the wonderful work that you are doing in your home countries as well. And I hope that you will be the next speaker on these speaker series, because all of us would like to hear that as well. But I think what I hear from the three of you is the importance of the communities that you're building, of people who care, of lawyers who care. And I'm sure you work not only with lawyers, but with youth, with parents, with all sorts of different stakeholders in the system to make the change that you do. You know, one thing that we do at Northwestern University is we work hand in hand with universities, several in Africa and in Asia as well, around building access to justice, around bringing universities in to amplify programs like what you're building, right? Having the university back and law schools back programs like this, so that as people learn to become lawyers, they learn the values that you are building in your organizations. So if there's ever any interest in partnering with the university space, please do reach out, because I think what you're doing is so important, and so important to talk to young lawyers about as well. Shannon, you asked a question about the school to prison pipeline, which is an American term for the fact that there are a lot of police officers now who are assigned to schools, and they're called school resource officers or something like that in many cases. And they are there to question kids about disciplinary issues, which perhaps a generation ago would be viewed as simply something that the school deals with. Perhaps you get suspended from school or something like this. Now the presence of police in schools can transform these school infractions into crimes. And so you see kids being taken out of school and charged with crimes at an increasing rate because of the presence of police officers in the school. And this speaks to a much larger issue, which is worthy of its own discussion, many discussions, the issue of mass incarceration here in the United States, and how police officers in school how the incarceration system is viewed as a solution to just about any problem you might have. And restorative justice, Shannon, as you said, is one great important alternative. But I think your question does situate this question of how do we treat kids, whether they're in schools, whether they're in interrogation rooms, whether they're on the streets, whether they're in courtrooms, how do we treat them within the larger legal system? And I just want to close by reiterating what an honor it's been for me to be here, to hear from advocates like yourselves all across the globe who care as deeply as I do, and who are committed as I am to fighting for kids, one by one, yes, but also to changing the system. I wish I could hear more about your cases, the cases that have touched you, that have changed your lives, the children you've met, and the success stories that I'm sure you have, not only about your own work, but about who the children with whom you have worked have become, because I'm sure you have many success stories there as well. So I will leave you with my thanks and gratitude for the incredible work that all of you are doing on behalf of children across the globe. If anybody would like to contact me and engage more, I'm here. I'm easily findable on social media, Twitter, Instagram, or at Northwestern University. It's been my honor, though, to be with such a committed group of advocates and to talk about our work that we all care about, that changed all of our lives. So thank you, thanks to Karen, thanks to Sanjay, and keep changing the world.
Thank you so much, Laura. And from the first time when people see you from media, we see your passion and we see your positive attitude in a very gloom, in kind of a negative environment. We need that. We need more people like you. We are very privileged to have you today with us and connect you to others. And we hope this connection will last for a long time. And we hope this is just a beginning of relationship with you and IBJ. And we will work together to make a change and make lives better and believe that we can be that change. Thank you all for joining us at different times, particularly the people in Asia in 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. And for Laura waking up like early morning to join us. And We had a great session today, and we look forward to our next session. We will let you all know. And thanks from International Register Justice, and again, thank you, Laura, and thank you, everyone, and interpreters too. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Laura, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for